My name is Riley, and I am 23 years old. For 18 years, the old garage at the far edge of our pecan estate in Las Cruces was an absolute dead zone. There were no warning signs, just a terrifying rule. When I was 5, my ball rolled near that forbidden building. My dad caught me. The severe punishment that followed wasn't just normal discipline. It was a brutal physical message designed to instill absolute fear. I never went near it again. I grew up suffocating in my own home. My dad, my stepmom, and my stepbrother lived in complete luxury, treating me like an unwanted ghost. The only person I could share my misery with was my best friend. The opportunity finally came when they packed their designer luggage and left for a week-long vacation in Hawaii, leaving me behind to look after the estate. While cleaning the living room desk that afternoon, I moved a stack of old newspapers and froze. Sitting right there, left behind by pure carelessness, was a heavy, rusty set of keys. 18 years of suppressed curiosity boiled over. I grabbed those keys and walked straight into the quiet backyard, heading directly toward the rusted steel door. For 18 years, my father and stepmother strictly forbade me from entering that garage. But one day, while they were on vacation in Hawaii, my curiosity got the best of me. I opened the garage door and nearly screamed when I saw what was inside. Welcome back to Revenge Mode. Get comfortable and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing, but they chose greed instead. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below, and let's get into it. When the lock popped open, I pulled hard on the steel door and immediately coughed violently as a thick cloud of dust rose from the dark space. I waited a moment for the air to clear before stepping inside the forbidden building. The interior was not empty, contradicting the stories I had been told. The front half of the structure was packed with discarded farming tools coated in gray grime. An old utility trailer occupied the center space, draped tightly under a heavy, moldy tarp. Stacks of decaying cardboard boxes leaned dangerously against the unfinished walls, creating a tight, disorganized maze. The air inside felt heavy, smelling strongly of dry rot and stale earth. I pulled my phone from my pocket and activated the flashlight. The bright, narrow beam cut through the floating dust. I carefully navigated my way around the rusted machinery and the towering boxes, watching my steps to avoid making noise. As I walked deeper into the structure and reached the far back corner of the building, my light hit something completely out of place. It was a small, isolated section completely closed off from floor to ceiling by heavy rusted iron mesh. A thick padlock secured a makeshift gate built into the fencing. I moved closer, aiming my light directly through the gaps in the metal wire. The beam swept across the cold concrete floor and stopped abruptly. My breath hitched. There was a human figure curled into a tight ball on a thin, filthy mattress in the corner. Intense panic surged through my chest. I stumbled backward, my boots scraping loudly against the concrete. My immediate thought was that a dangerous trespasser had broken into the estate and taken shelter here. My hands started to shake, and I braced myself to sprint back to the house to call the police. Before I could turn away, the figure shifted. The sudden movement made me freeze completely in my tracks. The person slowly raised their head from the dirty floor. The harsh glare of my flashlight hit them directly in the face. Desperately trying to block the blinding light, the figure lifted a painfully thin, bony arm to shield their eyes. As the sleeve of their oversized, ragged shirt slipped down, it revealed a very distinct mark on the right wrist. It was a long, crescent-shaped scar. I stopped breathing entirely. That specific scar acted like an electric shock straight to my brain. It perfectly matched a core memory from when I was 5 years old. It was the exact mark belonging to the woman who supposedly abandoned our family and vanished without a single trace 18 years ago. I forced my legs to move, stepping forward until my hands gripped the cold iron mesh. I lowered the flashlight beam slightly to clearly illuminate the face hidden beneath a tangled mess of hair. It was a face severely hollowed out by time and malnutrition, but the underlying bone structure and those deeply sunken eyes were absolutely unmistakable. The person locked inside this animal cage was my biological mother, Clara. I stood there paralyzed, my mind failing to process the horrific reality right in front of me. She stared back at me, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. She recognized me. I could see a sudden, desperate spark of recognition fighting through the absolute despair in her wide eyes. She desperately tried to speak, but her vocal cords failed. Her chapped, severely cracked lips stretched open wide, but no actual words came out. Her damaged throat only managed to produce a series of choked, desperate wheezes. She reached her trembling fingers toward the mesh, pressing them against the cold metal wire. That very night, I used heavy-duty bolt cutters to sever the rusted iron mesh and secretly guided my mother into my bedroom to hide her. The journey across the dark yard was agonizingly slow. She could barely support her own weight, forcing me to carry most of her mass against my shoulder, while carefully avoiding the gravel paths to stay completely silent. Once we were safely inside, I engaged the heavy deadbolt on my solid oak door and pulled the blackout curtains tightly shut. I guided her to the edge of my mattress and went straight to the ensuite bathroom. I gathered clean cotton towels, a first aid kit, and filled a large basin with warm water. Returning to her side, I spent the next 2 hours meticulously addressing her physical condition. I carefully peeled away the ragged, filthy layers of her clothing. Using the damp towels, I wiped away nearly 2 decades of accumulated grime. The warm water in the basin quickly turned dark gray. I applied antiseptic ointment to the numerous painful festering sores covering her thin arms and ankles. I soaked a soft washcloth in clean water and gently pressed it against her severely cracked, bleeding lips. Witnessing the extreme physical devastation of her captivity filled my chest with an overwhelming, suffocating agony. I gripped her bony, trembling hand tightly in mine. Looking directly into her hollow, terrified eyes, my voice shook uncontrollably. "Mom, it's me, Riley. No one can hurt you anymore." Heavy tears immediately spilled over her lower eyelids, tracking down her sunken cheeks. She desperately tried to answer me. Her throat muscles strained, but her vocal cords were severely damaged from 18 years of forced silence. Instead of a clear voice, her throat only managed to produce a harsh, agonizingly raspy wheeze that formed a single terrifying word. "Dan. Grr." Recognizing that verbal communication was causing her extreme physical pain, I immediately stopped her from trying to speak. I walked over to my study desk, pulled out a blank spiral-bound notebook and a black ballpoint pen, and placed them directly into her hands. Her fingers curled around the plastic barrel of the pen, awkwardly having forgotten the basic motor skills required to hold it. Her hand shook violently as she pressed the metal tip against the paper, nearly tearing the thin sheet. She did not attempt to write complete, coherent sentences. Instead, she forcefully scratched out fragmented, isolated words. I stood over her shoulder, watching the jagged black ink form a sequence of highly destructive terms: Walter, Annette, trust fund, drugged, don't trust anyone. Staring down at those specific jagged words, the horrifying truth of the past 18 years rapidly snapped together in my mind. The pieces connected flawlessly with my fragmented childhood memories and the current financial structure of our estate. My dad had engaged in a secret, illicit affair with my stepmom right under this very roof. When my mother discovered their betrayal, she undoubtedly threatened divorce. Doing so would have stripped him of everything because the massive multi-million-dollar trust fund left by my grandfather belonged exclusively to her. If my dad and stepmom had simply murdered her, the police would have launched a homicide investigation, and the trust fund would have transferred directly to me. They needed the money, and they needed a strict legal loophole. To secure the wealth, they dragged her to that outbuilding and meticulously staged a fake disappearance. By keeping her physically trapped but legally alive and merely missing my dad, was able to acquire long-term power of attorney. This calculated legal maneuver gave him and my stepmom unrestricted, unquestioned access to drain her entire inheritance year after year. The next morning, I took the rusty set of keys I found yesterday and tested them on the lock of my dad's home office to search for verifying evidence. His extreme arrogance and his absolute certainty that no one in the house would ever dare to defy his strict rules resulted in a massive critical oversight. He had never bothered to upgrade the security or change the locks on his private sanctuary. He simply continued using the same old hardware for nearly 2 decades. I slid the tarnished brass key into the cylinder, turned it slowly, and the heavy mahogany door clicked open smoothly. I stepped inside the pristine study and immediately locked the door behind me, ensuring I would not be interrupted. I systematically searched through the heavy wooden drawers of his large executive desk, carefully looking for any hidden compartments. My hands sifted through basic tax files and estate maintenance records until I noticed a slight, unnatural elevation in the thick carpet under the desk. I pushed the heavy oak chair aside and rolled back the expensive rug, revealing a heavy steel floor safe embedded directly into the concrete foundation. A digital keypad flashed faintly in the dim light. I did not need to guess the combination. I specifically remembered a small folded piece of paper clearly labeled Safe Code, carelessly tucked inside a shared family address book in the kitchen a few months ago. I punched in that exact sequence of numbers. The heavy steel mechanism clicked loudly and the thick metal lid popped up. I reached inside the dark cavity and pulled out a large stack of thick manila folders. The very first document resting on top was exactly what my mother had warned me about. It was the original finalized power of attorney document. I rapidly scanned the dense legal pages and stopped at the final sheet. There, perfectly imitating her unique handwriting, was a highly sophisticated forged signature of my mother. This specific legal paper officially granted absolute, unquestioned financial control over her entire inherited estate directly to my dad and my stepmom. Beneath those binding legal documents lay dozens of thick envelopes containing monthly banking statements. I pulled them out and spread them neatly across the polished wooden desk. The financial records painted a very clear, horrifying picture of their systematic, relentless theft. The detailed transaction histories showed massive withdrawals being directly transferred from the grandfather's trust fund into my stepmom's personal checking accounts. Millions of dollars had been completely drained over the last 18 years to fully fund their lavish lifestyle, covering everything from 5-star tropical vacations to the expensive monthly payments for Leo's custom supercars. I did not panic, and I did not waste time looking for a printer or a scanner. I simply pulled out my smartphone and activated the camera. Holding my hands perfectly steady, I took high-resolution, crystal-clear photographs of every single page of the forged power of attorney and the most damaging bank transfers. I meticulously captured the transaction dates, the specific routing numbers, and the forged signatures. Once I secured all the digital evidence I needed, I carefully restacked the physical documents in their exact original order. I placed them back inside the steel safe, closed the heavy lid until it locked, and rolled the carpet perfectly back into its original position. I quickly attached the high-resolution images to an encrypted anonymous email and sent the entire digital file directly to our family lawyer, Everett. Looking down at the camera screen on my phone, I muttered to myself, "You were way too confident in your own cruelty, Dad." I immediately dialed my phone and waited for the line to connect. "Everett, I just sent you an email. You need to get over here right now, immediately." That afternoon, our family lawyer Everett parked his car hastily in front of the house and followed me straight up to the second floor. I pushed open the heavy oak door to my bedroom and stepped aside to let him enter. He walked in, his eyes immediately locking onto the fragile figure sitting on the edge of the mattress. The moment he fully registered her severely emaciated frame, his hand went completely limp. His heavy leather briefcase slipped from his grip, crashing loudly onto the hardwood floor. Papers spilled out across the rug, but he did not even look down to retrieve them. The experienced attorney stood absolutely paralyzed for several agonizing seconds. He stared at her hollow face, trying to reconcile the vibrant woman he once represented with the broken survivor sitting before him. Tears rapidly welled up in his eyes, spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. He slowly walked forward and knelt down right beside the bed, unable to hide his overwhelming grief. Everett knelt down, his voice breaking. "Oh my God, Clara. I'm so sorry. I truly didn't know they did this terrible thing to you." He kept repeating his apologies, his shoulders shaking as he fully grasped the horrific reality of being completely deceived by my dad for 18 long years. My mother looked at him, her chest rising and falling unsteadily, but she managed a weak, forgiving nod. It took Everett a few minutes to regain his professional composure. He wiped his face, stood back up, and turned to me. I handed him my smartphone. He quickly scrolled through the high-resolution images of the forged documents and the bank transfers I had captured. His expression hardened into pure legal fury. He handed the device back to me and confirmed our immediate priority. We had to move her to a completely secure location immediately, long before he could safely present this massive, undeniable fraud case to the federal authorities. Leaving her here was too much of a physical risk. Right at that crucial moment, I heard the faint sound of an engine cutting off outside. Earlier that morning, I had secretly contacted Gwen, instructing her to rent a discreet vehicle. She navigated the long driveway, perfectly parking a small unmarked box truck right up against the back patio door to completely block any possible line of sight from the distant neighboring properties. Heavy footsteps echoed rapidly up the wooden staircase. Gwen pushed the door open, stating firmly, "The truck is running at the back door. We have to get her out of here before anyone sees." I grabbed a thick wool blanket from the closet and wrapped it securely around my mother's frail shoulders, covering her head to protect her from the harsh outside light. Everett moved to her left side, and Gwen quickly took her right. Together, we gently lifted her off the mattress. She was terrifyingly light, making it easy for us to support her weight as we carefully maneuvered her down the back staircase. We moved swiftly and silently through the kitchen, stepping out into the late afternoon air. Gwen opened the back of the truck, revealing a makeshift bed of soft cushions she had prepared. We helped my mother inside, securing her comfortably in the dark, safe space. Gwen jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine while Everett leaned through the window and gave her the exact coordinates for a top-secret private medical clinic located deep in the suburbs. The facility was entirely off the grid and managed by trusted colleagues, ensuring my mother would receive immediate medical evaluation and absolute physical protection while we prepared the final trap. About a day before the flight from Hawaii landed, I set to work establishing a surveillance system in the living room. I did not waste a single second going back to clean or rearrange the old outbuilding. Instead, I focused my entire attention exclusively on the main house. I had obtained a high-definition microcamera, a device no larger than a button. Taking the tiny black lens, I carefully embedded it deep within the thick foliage of a large artificial potted plant sitting on the corner end table. I spent nearly an hour meticulously adjusting the artificial leaves to perfectly conceal the hardware while maintaining an unobstructed crystal-clear view aimed directly at the central leather sofa area. I synced the device to a secure cloud server, running multiple tests to ensure that every minor movement and every whispered sound in the room would be recorded flawlessly and broadcast in real time. My phone suddenly vibrated with an incoming call from Everett. He spoke quickly, his tone carrying precise professional authority. He informed me that the federal authorities had officially accepted the massive file of digital evidence we provided. An elite tactical unit of law enforcement officers was already moving into position, silently surrounding the extensive outer perimeter of the Pecan estate. They were utilizing unmarked vehicles and maintaining strict radio silence to avoid any suspicion from the neighbors. However, the authorities needed one final, undeniable piece to completely lock down the criminal charges without any chance of a legal defense. They specifically required a direct admission of guilt, a violent outburst, or an immediate panicked reaction from the culprits regarding the stolen keys or the hidden truth. "The police have surrounded the perimeter," Everett instructed firmly through the speaker. "You just need to stay calm and let them reveal their true nature when they walk in." I stared directly at the tiny invisible lens hidden in the plant. "Rest assured," I replied coldly. "I have waited 18 years for this day. I will not ruin it." Shortly after I ended the call with the attorney, my phone buzzed again in my palm. This time, it was a text message notification from Leo. Even from thousands of miles away across the Pacific Ocean, his sheer entitled arrogance radiated through the glowing screen. He pompously ordered me to thoroughly scrub the entire house from top to bottom, wash his expensive cars, and prepare fresh meals for their grand arrival tomorrow afternoon. Reading his demanding words, my pulse did not quicken, and I felt absolutely no surge of anger. The era of being treated like a disposable servant was permanently over. I simply typed out a single generic smiley face emoji and hit send. In my mind, I was already perfectly visualizing every single calculated step of the impending counterattack required to aggressively unmask them all. I did not need to construct any complex physical traps or lay out complicated bait around the property. My strategy relied entirely on calculated psychological warfare. I meticulously organized the living room, plumping the expensive cushions and arranging the heavy glass coffee table to project the exact pristine environment they expected from their habitually obedient daughter. I carefully polished the glass surfaces, removing any trace of my earlier activities. I created a flawless, invisible glass cage right in the center of their luxurious domain. I sat down quietly in the leather armchair, smoothing out my clothes, and fully embraced the profound, heavy silence of the large, empty house. All I had to do now was maintain my usual submissive demeanor and patiently wait for the arrogant thieves to confidently walk right into the exact center of my perfectly laid trap. Exactly at 4 o'clock the next afternoon, the harsh crunching sound of tires grinding against the gravel driveway echoed outside, signaling that their lavish vacation had officially come to an end. The heavy double doors swung open wide. My dad, my stepmom, and Leo walked into the grand foyer, dragging premium leather luggage behind them. Their skin was deeply tanned from the tropical sun, and they were laughing loudly, their boisterous voices completely shattering the quiet atmosphere of the house. My stepmom carelessly tossed her expensive designer coat onto a nearby accent chair without even looking. She immediately snapped her fingers in my direction, arrogantly ordering me to hurry into the kitchen and prepare a pitcher of ice-cold drinks for them. I did not move toward the kitchen. Instead, I walked deliberately toward the center of the living room. I stopped right in front of the heavy glass coffee table. I did not say a single word of greeting, nor did I display my usual submissive posture. I simply raised my right hand and forcefully threw the heavy rusted set of garage keys directly onto the pristine glass surface. The violent impact created a harsh, echoing clatter that instantly silenced the entire room. The metallic noise hung heavily in the air, sharp and completely out of place in their perfectly controlled environment. My dad abruptly stopped walking. His eyes locked onto the jagged brass keys resting on the table. The deep tan on his face seemed to drain away in a split second, replaced by a sickly, absolute pallor. His physical reaction was immediate and entirely instinctive. He did not immediately check his pockets for missing financial documents or rush toward his home office to check the safe. His worst fear bypassed the stolen wealth entirely. Total unadulterated panic overtook his features as the horrifying reality of those specific keys registered in his brain. I looked straight into my dad's eyes, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Did you enjoy the vacation? Do you remember leaving the garage keys at home?" The remaining color vanished completely from his face. The veins in his thick neck bulged violently against his skin. He took a heavy step toward me, his hands curling into tight fists. My dad turned pale and roared, "You went in there. Where is she? Answer me right now." Standing just a few feet away, Leo looked completely bewildered. He stared at the rusted keys, then at his furious father, and finally at me. He had spent his entire life enjoying the stolen wealth without ever knowing its true horrifying source. He had absolutely no idea what was currently happening or why the atmosphere had violently shifted into pure hostility over an old piece of metal. Leo stepped back in total confusion, throwing his hands up in the air. "What the hell are you two talking about? Who is she?" My dad completely ignored Leo's frantic question. The desperate need to maintain his 18-year lie overrode any remaining shred of rationality. He completely lost control of his temper, inadvertently admitting his ultimate guilt by screaming about her confinement. He lunged violently across the coffee table, his arms outstretched, fully intending to physically attack me and force me to reveal my mother's hidden location. Before his grasping hands could even reach my shoulders, a deafening noise erupted from outside. The piercing, high-pitched wail of multiple police sirens suddenly shattered the afternoon air, echoing violently against the estate walls. Heavy vehicle tires screeched to a halt on the gravel, and the flashing red and blue lights instantly illuminated the large living room windows, completely destroying his absolute illusion of ultimate power. A few hours after the swift arrest successfully concluded, the sprawling Pecan estate finally settled into a state of absolute silence and genuine safety. The heavily armed police officers immediately escorted my dad and my stepmom into the back of their specialized transport vehicles, while the neighbors watched in complete shock. The two arrogant criminals now faced a devastating list of extremely serious federal charges that included aggravated false imprisonment and massive financial fraud. Depending on the final ruling of the federal judge during their upcoming criminal trial, they stared down the terrifying prospect of receiving a sentence spanning several decades, or potentially spending the rest of their natural lives locked behind bars. Leo was left completely alone, standing in the middle of the ruined living room as the flashing police cruisers drove away into the distance. The arrogant entitlement he displayed just a few minutes earlier completely evaporated when he finally realized his entire luxurious existence was entirely built upon a horrific, unforgivable crime. Without any further access to the stolen trust fund that previously financed his lavish lifestyle, he was abruptly forced to face the harsh reality of the real world with absolutely nothing to his name. He had to figure out his own future from scratch, without the massive financial safety net he always took for granted. During the following months, my mother began a very long and highly complicated rehabilitation process at one of the best medical facilities located in the state. Working closely with a team of dedicated medical professionals, she underwent rigorous physical therapy sessions every single day to rebuild her severely atrophied leg muscles so she could slowly learn how to walk independently again. Simultaneously, she participated in intensive psychological counseling and specialized speech therapy designed specifically to repair her damaged vocal cords and help her regain her stolen voice. Witnessing her gradual transformation from a terrified prisoner back into a functioning human being brought me a profound sense of relief. Thanks to the relentless legal efforts orchestrated by Everett, the federal courts eventually ordered the complete restoration of the stolen trust fund back to its rightful owner. Once the exhaustive legal proceedings officially concluded, we immediately sold the haunted property in Las Cruces to completely erase the dark physical reminders of her long captivity. We purchased a beautiful sunlit house located right on the coast, where my mother could finally experience the genuine freedom she was denied for almost 2 decades. Looking back at 18 agonizing years of living entirely inside a fabricated reality, I recognize some extremely harsh but necessary life lessons. Bottomless greed possesses the terrifying power to transform people living under the exact same roof into actual monsters capable of unimaginable cruelty. Stealing wealth generated by the blood and tears of an innocent victim ultimately serves as a one-way ticket, plunging the perpetrators straight into a dark prison cell. More importantly, no matter how deeply the truth is locked away or buried under thick layers of deception, it will eventually shatter every steel door to emerge directly into the light. A mother's enduring love combined with relentless courage remains the only absolute force capable of defeating the most malicious psychological manipulation ever created. Thank you so much for listening to this incredibly dark but very real story until the very last minute. If you ever found yourself placed in my specific situation, how exactly would you deal with these treacherous betrayers after discovering their secret? Please do not hesitate to share your honest thoughts down in the comment section below. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to catch our next highly dramatic family stories.